We like to say that when superpowers flex over a thin piece of water, it's about oil and shipping lanes and the arithmetic of global trade. But maybe that's the thing we tell ourselves, so we don't have to look at the harder answer. What if choke points, the narrow places where all the power flows through one door, tell us something we don't really want to know about ourselves? That's the question I want to sit with you on. Not the military one, the question underneath, the one that keeps returning generation after generation to the same narrow pieces of water. Why can't we seem to leave them alone? Because right now, in April 2026, we're at a moment where that question matters. 2 days ago, the United States Navy began a formal blockade of Iranian ports. The highest level diplomatic talks between Washington and Tehran in nearly 5 decades just collapsed after running 21 hours straight. The Strait of Hormuz, that 34-kilometer passage between Iran and Oman, is now contested water. Not abstract, real, where 230 tankers are waiting, where 800 vessels are watching, where 20,000 crew members are stranded between two powers testing each other, where 10 million barrels of oil a day are waiting to move, and no one knows if they will. 20% of the world's oil and liquefied natural gas flows through this 34-kilometer passage. That means 8 billion people have organized their lives around the assumption that this door stays open. And now we're testing whether it will. But the question isn't whether Hormuz stays open. The question is what it says about us that we've built the entire system this way. What does it tell us about human nature that we keep coming back to the same narrow passages, generation after generation, to fight? Let me walk through what happened first, because the details reveal something true beneath the headlines. April 11th, early morning. Pakistan brought the Americans and Iranians to the table in a neutral city. 300 American officials, 70 Iranian diplomats. The talks ran 21 hours straight. Simultaneously, Navy destroyers moved into position to begin mine-clearing operations. The message was clear. We're talking, but we're also ready. We're at the table, but our ships are in the water. The White House announced the United States would blockade anything moving through the strait itself, the entire passage, the strait wide. Any vessel from any nation would be stopped and searched. It was a major escalation announced as routine. But then something changed. 10 hours later, CENTCOM, the regional military command, issued a follow-on order. Not the strait itself, Iranian ports only, just the Iranian ships, just the cargo coming from Iranian territory. The language shifted, the geographic scope shifted, the entire meaning of what they were doing shifted with it. This is the gap. This is what choke points reveal about power. The political leadership had announced something absolute, a blockade of the entire strait, a complete test of wills. But the operational commanders, the Navy people who actually execute this, they knew something the politicians had barely admitted to themselves. A strait-wide blockade would drag 40 nations into a conflict none of them volunteered for. It would create energy shortages that hit American allies as hard as American enemies. It would be the thing that actually starts the war, not prevents it. So they tightened the noose differently. Iranian ports, Iranian vessels, Iranian cargo. You can control that without collapsing the global economy. You can enforce that without forcing neutral nations to choose sides. But look at what that reveals. When we're actually at the edge, when we're staring at the moment where blockade becomes war, the people with the power suddenly become very careful about what's actually possible. The military superiority we've spent 60 years building, the Navy we've spent $1 trillion constructing, doesn't automatically translate into the outcome we want. There's a gap between what we can do and what we can actually accomplish. And that gap is where reality lives. The Strait of Hormuz is 34 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. In the Cold War, strategists called these places strategic straits because they compress geography into a single test, a single moment. Whoever controls the pinch point decides who moves and who stops, or so we've told ourselves. But let me offer three principles about choke points, because they're not what we think they are. The first, control of a choke point is not the same as control of what moves through it. Iran has been mining the strait, collecting tolls, $1 million per ship, sometimes more. 22 merchant vessels have been hit or damaged since this conflict began. They opened the door and they're controlling who walks through. But Iran no longer knows where all the mines are. They deployed them themselves, and then the situation changed so fast, escalated so rapidly, they lost track of the map. They opened the door and lost the key. They can't reopen the strait now, even if they wanted to. The choke point has locked from the inside. Control of the mechanism and control of the outcome have separated. The second principle is older and more uncomfortable. Military superiority does not extract political concession. We've learned this abstractly for 70 years. The United States has crushed every military opponent it's faced in the last generation. Air superiority, naval dominance, precision strikes, logistical reach that no other nation can match. But in 1987 and 1988, when Ronald Reagan decided to escort Kuwaiti tankers through the strait, Operation Earnest Will and Praying Mantis, we fought the largest surface engagement the Navy had fought since World War II. We destroyed Iranian ships. We destroyed Iranian oil platforms. We demonstrated with extreme clarity that we have the military capability to do whatever we want in the strait. And it didn't change the political outcome. The Iran-Iraq war continued. The strait closed when Iran wanted it closed. Fast forward to now. The US has bombed Iranian facilities twice since this war started. Conventional strikes, precision weapons. And Iran's response has been to tighten the blockade, to charge tolls, to make clear they will extract a cost. The bombing didn't work. Dominance on the battlefield is not dominance over the outcome. Having the most powerful navy doesn't mean you decide what happens in the strait. The other side isn't trying to win the naval battle. They've already lost that. They're trying to decide whether this is worth the price, and they've decided it is. The third principle cuts deepest. We say we're blockading Iranian ports because of nuclear enrichment, because of weapons capability, because of regional security and strategic stability. And maybe some of that is true. But why does this particular choke point matter so much? Why not sanctions, economic pressure, technological isolation? Why not something that doesn't require sitting at the door with a hand on the trigger? Because choke points compress power. They make power visible. When you stand at a choke point, you're standing at a door that everyone has to walk through. You are the moment of decision. You are the person who says yes or no. And humans, we've never been very good at standing at doors. We get tense, we test, we push. We want to see if the other person will blink. The Suez Canal has been fought over for 200 years. The Malacca Strait, the Panama Canal, the Strait of Hormuz. These places have been fought over because they're small and they matter. Because standing at a door is irresistible when the door matters. In 1962, the United States quarantined Cuba. That was the word we used instead of blockade, because blockade is an act of war. But the thing that made the world hold its breath for 13 days wasn't the missiles in Cuba. It was the image of Navy ships stopping Soviet freighters at a line drawn on the ocean. The choke point. The test. The instant where either you back down or you push through. Now let me tell you about a choke point that reveals something deeper. It's November 1956, the Suez Crisis. The Suez Canal is narrower than the Strait of Hormuz. It's 190 kilometers long and at some points only 300 meters wide, the width of 3 football fields. Nearly all European oil flows through it. Nearly all trade between Europe and Asia moves through it. It's civilizationally important. In July 1956, Gamal Abdel Nasser announced that Egypt was nationalizing the Suez Canal. It had been an international waterway controlled by a company that was mostly British and French shareholders. But Nasser said no. This is our canal. This is Egyptian territory. We own it now. Now let me tell you about a choke point that reveals something deeper. It's November 1956, the Suez Crisis. The Suez Canal is narrower than the Strait of Hormuz. It's 190 kilometers long and at some points only 300 meters wide, the width of 3 football fields. Nearly all European oil flows through it. Nearly all trade between Europe and Asia moves through it. It's civilizationally important. In July 1956, Gamal Abdel Nasser announced that Egypt was nationalizing the Suez Canal. It had been an international waterway controlled by a company that was mostly British and French shareholders. But Nasser said no. This is our canal. This is Egyptian territory. We own it now. But here's what the Suez Crisis teaches us about choke points. Egypt owned the canal now, but Egypt couldn't keep it open. Nasser had blocked it himself, filled it with sunken ships, made it impassable. And when it came time to reopen it, when it came time to restore the commerce and the oil flow, Egypt couldn't do it alone. They needed British expertise. They needed French capital. They needed international cooperation to make the choke point work again. So the people who had invaded to maintain control ended up controlling it anyway, just through a different mechanism. The invasion failed. The occupation was reversed. But the dependency remained. Because choke points don't just create moments of confrontation, they create systems of dependency. If you control a choke point, you need the other side to keep using it. You need them to keep walking through the door. And that's the deepest thing about choke points. They're not just about power, they're about vulnerability. You have power over the other side, but only if they keep participating. Only if they keep playing the game. That's what we've done with the Strait of Hormuz. Created a system where one nation can say no to 20% of the world's oil supply. We've made it so that if someone closes the door, the whole system breaks. And we've built our entire economy around the assumption that no one will ever close that door permanently. But what if they are? We're sitting at that moment now, April 13, 2026. 2 days into the blockade of Iranian ports. The ceasefire has probably broken. The IRGC has warned of a severe response. We're in the space between talking and not talking. The moment right after the conversation ends and something else begins. The White House announced a 40-nation coalition supporting this action, mostly in language. The UK refused to participate in a full strait blockade. Israel endorsed it immediately. Germany is hedging. Japan is nervous. They depend on Middle Eastern oil more than anyone except China. Most of those nations are hoping this stays where it is, at the port level. They understand the arithmetic. A full strait closure would cost $1.5 trillion globally. The energy crisis would dwarf 1973. This would reshape the global economy in ways we haven't seen in a generation. And Iran is in a position where they can force that choice. They have mines, they have missiles, they have the willingness to bear costs that we're not sure about. They don't have naval superiority, but they don't need it to close a choke point. They just need to be willing to pay the price and for the other side to believe them. Which brings me back to the question underneath all of this. Not whether the blockade holds. The question that keeps returning, generation after generation, to the same narrow passages. Why do civilizations keep coming back to choke points to fight? We know they're dangerous. We know they compress conflict. We know that dominance on the water doesn't translate to dominance over the outcome. We know that opening a choke point is hard and closing it is harder. And we have known for centuries, that someone will always be sitting at the door, hand on the handle, testing whether the other side will blink. We build our entire global system around these places anyway. Maybe it's because power itself is a choke point. Money flows through certain channels, food flows through certain routes, energy flows through a handful of passages. And whoever sits at those passages, whoever can control the door, gets to say no, gets to set the price, gets to decide whether the world moves forward or stops. That's an almost irresistible kind of power. So we create choke points. We intentionally build economic and strategic systems where choke points exist, because choke points give us leverage. We tell ourselves it's temporary. We tell ourselves we'll diversify away. But we don't. We wait until the door is closed and someone is standing in front of it with their hand on the handle. And then we remember that we've arranged the entire system so that someone has to walk through that door. And then we negotiate, and then we compromise, and then we rebuild it the same way. The blockade will continue. Iran will test it. There will be incidents. And probably, this stays where it is, at the port level. Most crises don't become wars. Most confrontations back off before the final moment of pressure. Most blockades hold without shots fired. But the question that stays with me is different. What does it say about us that we've organized power around choke points? That we've made 20% of the world's energy dependent on 34 kilometers of water? That we keep coming back to the same narrow passages, year after year, generation after generation, to test each other again? Maybe it says we're not very good at learning. Maybe it says that choke points work, that leverage works, that being able to say no is too attractive to give up, even if it means living in a world where someone else can say no to you. Maybe it says something deeper about what power actually is. Not dominance, not the ability to destroy, just the ability to say no. Just standing at the door. I don't know the answer to that question, but I think it matters that we ask it, because the blockade will last weeks or months or longer. The tankers will wait, and somewhere, someone else will be looking at a different choke point, thinking about what it means to stand at a door that the whole world has to walk through. The question isn't whether we'll be back here. It's what we'll have learned when we do.